director of our Gender and Sexuality Center, and I'm also the interim dean of students. So thanks for coming to tonight's keynote lecture presented by Dr. Colleen Clemens, who is an associate professor. I'm going to bring her up in a second, but is an associate professor of non-Western literatures and the director of the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies minor program at Kutztown University. So Dr. Clemens was wonderful enough to join us for the evening. I'm really excited to hear her talk. She'll be talking about women and violence, but in a really different way than I would have even thought we were going to be talking about that from the very beginning, which is great. So thank you very much for taking the time out tonight to come to the lecture. If folks are interested, there'll be some other programs for Women's History Month. Tomorrow we'll be showing the Academy Award nominated documentary film RBG over in SciTech 117 with free popcorn. That's at 6. Tons of things happening next week. We got a spirituality panel on Thursday. Lots of things happening. So please be sure to check out www.esu.edu/women's history, and that'll take you to the calendar. So thanks again for coming, and I'll invite Dr. Clemens up.
Thanks.
We didn't
check the microphone. That's the only thing.
Oh, it works.
Works great. Excellent.
So, hi everybody. Thank you for asking me to be a part of East Stroudsburg University's Women's History Month celebration and for the lovely dinner and introduction. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is that tonight's talk is going to talk about violent images. I'm not going to show any violent clips, but there are some images that might be triggering. So I wanted to put that out there. So the first college course I ever developed focuses on women and violence, and I have been teaching variations of it for the past decade. Stemming from my interest in women who enact violence on and off the page, I wanted to ask students to think about our perceptions of women as, quote, naturally peaceful. When I tell people that I teach a course on women and violence, the conversation almost always goes like this. Interested and well-meaning person. What are you teaching this semester? Me. One of the classes is the course I developed on women and violence in film and literature. Interested and well-meaning person. Wow, there's so much to focus on. Domestic violence, rape, such a hard subject. Are you going to use the accused? Me, trying not to sound like a jerky academic. Actually, which is the jerkiest word on the planet, actually, the course focuses on women who perpetrate violence. I want to think about what it means when women enact violence as well. Long pause, furrowed brow, another beat. Oh, I never really thought about that. Will you talk about Lorena Bobbitt? And if you don't know who Lorena, does anybody remember who Lorena Bobbitt? Yeah, the two old people and me. Can you quickly tell everybody, all the youngins, who Lorena Bobbitt was?
Lorena Bobbitt's husband was really horrible to her in many, 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 many ways, and so she took out a knife one fine day and cut his penis off and like threw it in
on the side of the road.
It was in the state where I live.
Yeah,
so,
it was in New York,
right.
Yeah.
No, in Virginia.
Oh, in Virginia.
In Virginia, like it ended up like in some 7-Eleven parking lot somewhere,
Yes.
or whatever. It was recovered.
So in the 90s, this was kind of the thing that everybody thought about. It was
So that's my
So
piece
here's
of
one of the
history.
covers. This was the Daily News's cover when she was not convicted of that. So that's usually who comes up. That's like the natural person that people think about. And that is why I developed this class, because even the most thoughtful among us rarely take the time to consider women beyond the role of victim, which is what I want us to do tonight in an attempt to be less attached to notions of biological essentialism, the ideas that the way we act as gendered bodies is based only on our biology. So just a quick primer. Biological essentialism versus social constructionism. Biological essentialism would be think girls are sugar and spice and everything nice, while boys are snips and snails and puppy dog tails. Think gender reveal, which are actually sex reveal parties. They're not gender reveal parties. And how they rely on the notion that boys are drawn to guns while girls are drawn to pearls. Think about conversations about toxic masculinity and how they are grossly mischaracterized by the right as feminists saying that men are bad, while what we are actually saying is biology has little to do with the violence enacted more often by men than by women. Something we would not be able to correct because biology is challenging to tamper with and has to do more with the gender construct of masculinity and how it demands of boys to perform a violent brand of masculinity that very often conflicts with their own ideas of how they want to move through the world. So why does this matter? If we are going to investigate the one-sided idea that boys will be boys gives permission for rough behavior, and that locker room talk among men forgives bragging about sexual assault, then we also should interrogate the one-sided idea that women are earth mothers, giving life and are naturally peaceful. Both one-sided notions deny the fuller humanity for everyone. So tonight we will question our thinking about women's relationship to violence beyond that of being victim. I am not standing up here denying that women are more often victims of violence than they are perpetrators. Yet, we must still complicate the idea that women who perpetrate violence are, quote, unnatural if we are going to work against the limiting notion of biological essentialism. In her essay, Marooned on Gilligan's Island, Katha Pollitt recounts the story of being asked, and anything that I do in a direct quote, I'm gonna put up as well, because I know it's hard to follow. So this is her quote. She was asked to sign a woman's peace petition. It made the point such documents usually make, that women, as mothers, caregivers, and nurturers, have a special awareness of the precariousness of human life, see through jingoism and Cold War rhetoric, and would prefer nations to work out their difficulties peacefully, so that the military budget could be diverted to schools and hospitals and housing. It had the literary tone such documents usually have, as well as one superior and plaintive, as if the authors didn't know whether they were bragging or begging. We are wiser than you poor deluded menfolk was the subtext. So will you please, please, please listen to your moms and sign this petition for peace. Pollitt spends much of her essay denouncing the ideals of difference feminism, the idea that women are better, to get to the point that she refuses to sign that petition. In our cultural discourse, we hear this sentiment often. If women ran the world, there would be no war. And I'm sure you've heard that. Pollitt gives the best description and denunciation of difference feminism and its contribution to women's oppression. Although difference feminism, the idea, this brand of feminism that women are superior, that I do not ascribe to. So although it is couched in the language of praise, difference feminism is demeaning to women. It asks that women be admitted into public life and public discourse, not because they have a right to be there, but because they will improve those things. Even if this were true, and not the wishful thinking I believe it to be, why should the task of moral and social transformation be laid on women's doorstep and not on everyone's, or, for that matter, on men's by the broke it, you bought it, you fix it principle? Peace, the environment, a more humane workplace, economic justice, social support for children. These are issues that affect us all and are everyone's responsibility. By promising to assume that responsibility, different feminists lay the groundwork for excluding women again, as soon as it becomes clear that the promise cannot be kept. So basically, she's arguing, as am I tonight, that women are not superior, and the belief that they are actually deprives women of their humanity. So Pollitt continues, accepting the separate spheres ideology has obvious advantages in an era when women were formally barred from higher education, political power, and many jobs. But its defects are equally obvious. It defined all women by a single standard, and one developed by a sexist society. It offered women no way to enter professions that could not be defined as extensions of domestic roles. You could be a math teacher, but not a mathematician, a secretary, but not a sea captain. I don't know that many of us want to be sea captains. And no way to challenge any but the grossest abuses of male privilege. And then it finishes with, difference feminists are making a similar bid for power on behalf of women today and are caught in similar contradictions, which is what tonight is about. Once again, women are defined only by their family roles. Child raising is seen as women's glory and joy and opportunity for self-transcendence, while dad naps on the couch. Women who do not fit this stereotype are castigated as unfeminine. Nurses nurture, doctors do not. Domestic labor is romanticized and sold to women as a badge of moral worth. Yeah, lots of extra pages here. All right. So the reason I am spending time sharing her thoughts on difference feminism is to show that when a woman enacts violence, we as a society feel great anxiety because she is dismantling the binary of woman as natural caretaker. I agree with Pollitt's premise and want to push against the notion that only men are supposed to be violent. And the texts that portray women as violent actors anticipate this anxiety. When a woman is violent in a film or novel, she often has to have a reason, often having been sexually assaulted, that motivates her violence. So tonight, I'm going to focus on 3 films because their titles alone are enough fodder, so you don't have to have seen the films. But if we spent 14 weeks together, these are some of the other films that we would discuss. So tonight, we're going to talk about these 3 films, Monster Teeth and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. The title of several of these films demonstrate the anxiety we feel about a text displaying women as actors of violence. All of the films tell the story of a woman who was wronged. So how many of you have seen Teeth? Okay, how many of you have seen Monster? How many of you have seen Girl with the Dragon Tattoo? Okay, you don't have to have seen any of them, so you're gonna be fine, don't worry. I'm not gonna show you anything hard, though they all have hard things. So the titles demonstrate the anxiety we feel about a text displaying women actors of violence. All of the films tell the story of a woman who was wronged because that is the only way a woman would break out of the rigid mold of caretaking, peaceful Earth Mother. And when they do break out of that role, they are monstrous and no longer human. Tonight, I would like to discuss the obvious anxiety that is caused by women in 3 films, Monster, Teeth, and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. All 3 films focus on white women, which demonstrates, I believe, a second layer of anxiety about race and what happens when someone who is white enacts violence, a subject that deserves its own talk and something I hope we can discuss during our conversation at the end. When I asked my Facebook feed for suggestions of films that focus on women of color who are protagonists enacting violence, these 2 films, the first 2, Payback as a Mother from Breaking In and Set It Off, these were the most mentioned. And I haven't seen them yet, so I can't make an argument for them tonight, though I'm hoping some of you maybe have, and we'll share how those texts work to support or complicate the argument I am making tonight. The other film is a blaxploitation film, again, deserves its own conversation about how women use violence to gain agency. So we'll start with Monster. Based on the true story of Eileen Wuornos, this film follows Charlize Theron's character through the development of Wuornos' serial killing. When raped while working as a prostitute, Eileen kills her attacker. She comes to see that the world she lives in is dangerous and attempts to find a job off of the streets, but those positions won't take her because they see her as unqualified. She wants to enter the, quote, legitimate field of female work, i.e. a secretary, only to be told that she doesn't just get to jump into the world of law. So I'm gonna show 3 clips tonight. Oh. Sorry. Here we go.
I must have been around 13 years old because I remember I just put the baby up for adoption. They called an assembly at my junior high because this guy who played drums for Slim Whitman was coming to talk to us about success and making your mark on the world.
I don't have any experience per se, but I'm a real hard worker.
I was real excited because he was the first real celebrity I'd seen, and this was exactly the kind of thing I wanted to learn how to follow in the footsteps
I don't
of.
even write it down, you know, it just stays right there. And you should know that I've worked with people all my life. So I'm real good with people, and I know how to work a Rolodex.
So I listened real hard to any advice he had. And for sure, he said something that just stuck right in my mind. It was, all you need in life is love and to believe in yourself. Then there's nothing you can't do.
Right. You make sure that I have all of this straight. Basically, you have no experience, no college degree, no resume, no work history whatsoever, in fact, and now you would like to be a lawyer.
No, see, I'm sorry, but when I read the ad, it said that you were looking for a secretary.
Okay. Well, you need to learn how to type. You'll need computer skills. Most of our secretaries have college degrees. In fact, most of them have specialized in law. I don't mean to sound harsh, but frankly, it's a little insulting. I see you're from Daytona Beach, and all of that looks great. It must be wonderful, but can I tell you something? When the beach party is over, you don't get to say, you know what, I think now I'd like to have what everybody else has worked their entire life for. It doesn't work that way.
Fuck you, man. Yeah, fuck you. You don't fucking know me.
Okay, great, that's great. See, no, I'm so sorry I didn't hire you before. Leslie, could you please escort Miss, I don't even know her name because of course she doesn't have a resume, out.
I don't need a fucking escort, you piece of shit. What, you think I'm a fucking retard? Take your fucking job and fucking shove it. Fuck you, Leslie.
Okay. Right. Well, she makes her point, yes. So, that's Eileen trying to get a job, trying to leave prostitution, trying to find that legitimate space of work. So then the film shows us that she has no other choice but to return to the streets. And once there, she starts to kill her Johns because she is terrified of being raped, because she is raped earlier in the movie. And then the murders turn. Eileen spares one man only to kill another who offers her help. When she is enacting fear of being raped, the audience feels some kind of pity for her, but when she takes the life of an innocent, she loses the audience's sympathy and becomes the eponymous monster. Here's where the titles start to matter. Why isn't the film titled Eileen? Because that would humanize her, and there is no humanity allowed for a woman that enacts violence. We cannot sit with such an idea that there might be something human to her. She must be a monster for us to reconcile our ideas of femininity with a character we feel for during the majority of the film. Now, interestingly, the documentary actually does use her first name about her life. If we look at a list of films about serial killers that are based on true stories like this one, most of the titles allude to the name given to the male killer. Jack the Ripper, Dr. Death, Jeffrey Dahmer, Zodiac, and the Green River Killer are examples. Monster's title does no such thing. She is a monster. When relying on biological essentialism, it is beyond our imagination to see anything natural or human about her. No human woman could ever do such a thing. Perhaps that is why so much was made of Theron's transformation, as if we all needed to be reminded, it's okay, remember this is all fake. The most gorgeous woman in the world is under all of that makeup. Donica Kimball summarizes nicely and complicates the film. So this is Kimball. Throughout her life, Wuornos experienced horrific instances of gendered abuse, which eventually led to a violent outlash at her unfair circumstances. Monster vividly documents the life of a woman whose experiences under a dominant patriarchal culture racked with abuse, poverty, and desperation led to a life of crime, imprisonment, and eventually death. Though on-screen depictions of violent women are portrayed as empowering, as is the case with vengeful Furiosa in Mad Max, or here she is, or the cathartic revenge plot for Beatrix Kiddo in Kill Bill. Used to be on the syllabus, it got kicked off because I'm mad at Quentin Tarantino. Eileen Wuornos' story tells a different story for violent women. Monster illustrates that all too often, violent women's pasts are rifled with oppression, and in defending themselves, they face consequences from legal systems that have proven to fail them in the past. For Eileen, violent self-preservation ended in demise. So, I want to remind you that I am not condoning violence as a form of agency, but violence, sadly, is part of our current human condition. So denying the fact that women may sometimes be violent by transforming them into monsters illustrates the problem with a reliance on biological essentialism. Teeth. Oh, you're gonna learn something tonight if you haven't ever heard of this movie. There were like 3 people that saw this, yes? Okay. The rape revenge film Teeth falls into this same issue with titling. Interestingly, Teeth makes the argument that Dawn develops her vagina dentata, which I guess I should tell you is a toothed vagina. It's from mythology, and it sings along nicely to Hakuna Matata. So you're welcome. I always sing it when I teach this class. You're welcome. So she develops her vagina dentata as a biological adaptation to rape culture. The film again creates a space of sympathy for Dawn. We can understand why she becomes violent through and in spite of her biology. Her vagina dentata takes over her thinking self. Then Dawn learns to use it for her own good. And then Dawn becomes a vigilante. The movie poster is telling. Her vagina makes her squeamish. The power of it is too much for her to handle. Again, why isn't this film called Dawn? Are her teeth more important than herself? Her toothed vagina is clearly anxiety-producing, and she is also monstrous. Her vagina is all she is, and she must simultaneously protect it and eventually learn to use it to protect other women. So I'm going to move you through the film. So early in the film, Dawn is a nymph-like virgin, committed to saving herself until marriage. She is the poster child for the good girl, a loving daughter who obeys the doctrines of the church and spends her time spreading the gospel of virginity. Everything Dawn knows about the world and herself changes when her falsely pious boyfriend Toby takes her to a far-off swimming hole and rapes her. So this is the worst of the stills. A confused and terrified Dawn reacts by screaming and then, much to everyone's surprise, cutting off his penis to interrupt the rape. Little does Dawn know that her lessons about Darwin in her biology classes are taking hold in her own body. So Dawn takes to the internet to learn what has happened to her body. I suggest you avoid Googling vagina dentata if you are faint of heart. And she learns that her vagina, something she didn't want to see the picture of even before the rape, is a tool of terror, in her opinion. So I'm going to show you the scene where she does the research. It's probably going to force us to watch a little ad, but we'll deal with it. Maybe we'll get lucky. Oh no, good. So because of abstinence-only education, like she doesn't know anything about her body.
Vagina appears in the mythology of many and diverse cultures all over the world. In these myths, the story is always the same. The hero must do battle with the woman, the toothed creature, and break her power. From a primitive masculine dread of the mysteries of women in sexual union, fears of weakness, impotence. It is a nightmare image of the power and horror of female sexuality. The myth imagines sexual intercourse as an epic journey that every man must make back to the womb, a dark crucible that hatched him.
So Dawn is repulsed by her own body, by the adaptation that is required for the survival of the fittest in order for her to survive rape culture, which is the argument the film is making. At this point in the movie, she sees herself as unnatural, as a monster, and that's why she's fleeing. So, in a desire to learn about her body, to confirm what is normal or abnormal biology, she goes to another man who should be trusted, her gynecologist. During the exam, he also takes advantage of Dawn's vulnerabilities and assaults her. When he doesn't listen to her protests, he loses a finger. And Dawn flees, screaming at the fear she now has over her own body and its unnaturally violent behavior. With little to no information about her own body brought upon her abstinence-only education, Dawn is left confused, while her curiosity mirrors that of any young woman starting to learn about sex. Viewers finally relax when they see Dawn's in the hand of a loving partner, Ryan, who seems to care for her. With loving embraces and tenderness, Ryan takes a nervous Dawn to bed. Her vagina dentata seems to be reserved only for instances in which Dawn needs protection, so Ryan is safe in her embrace. But when Dawn learns that Ryan has bedded her as part of a bet while he is still inside of her, Dawn's evolutionary adaptation intercedes and Ryan is punished for his use and abuse of Dawn. So now 2 trusted boyfriends and a doctor have initiated Dawn into the world of oppressive sex and violence, and all 3 times her vagina, the thing that has left her most vulnerable and is unnatural, has acted as a protector. Gets better. Finally, upon the death of her mother, Dawn starts to see her vagina as a tool, not only for survival, but also for justice. Her awful stepbrother, Brad, is the first to be the victim of the vagina dentata used purposefully. Having ignored the cries of her mother and his dying stepmother, Brad allows the most important woman in Dawn's life to die a horrible death. A coy Dawn seduces Brad to punish him. His vicious dog gets to eat the spoils of the sexual encounter Brad had been taunting Dawn with for years. The final scene does the most interesting work in thinking about this, in terms of considering teeth as part of the rape revenge genre, and is perhaps why I'm so drawn to including it in my course. Dawn has now left her home to begin a new life as she can no longer survive in her town. After a succession of men whom Dawn should be able to trust to take advantage of her, to not take advantage of her, Dawn finally embraces her toothed vagina and uses it as a tool of resistance and justice as she works now to protect other women from the awful men roaming the world. When hitchhiking, she is picked up by the archetypal dirty old man that solicits sex from her as his dry tongue licks his even drier lips. In the film's final moments, the audience sees Dawn smile and go toward this encounter. And we know that Dawn will now use her vagina dentata as an act of vigilante justice. She will sever the penis of this man so he cannot use it again and hurt other girls. Instead of being surprised by her vagina or using it as a form of reactive self-protection, Dawn is now being proactive and seeking out the opportunity to use her unnatural teeth to act as a fighter. She goes toward the encounter and accepts her body for what it is, a powerful sexual being that is adapted to a world that is often harsh and dangerous for the female species. I've taught this film several times in my college courses. If I were to make a generalization at the end of the film, the male students groan and the female students cheer. I suppose that is a natural response to some degree. After all, viewers did just witness a dog eat a severed penis as if it were a milk bone. However, this film always makes me ask this question. Is this the kind of agency that we as women want? Access to violence? Is Dawn, as Tammy Oler calls her in the article The Brave Ones about rape revenge films, quote, a satisfying fantasy of power and fortitude? Again, the film creates space for Dawn, sympathy for Dawn. We can understand why she becomes violent through and in spite of her biology. Her vagina dentata takes over her thinking self, and then Dawn learns to use it for good, and then Dawn becomes a vigilante. Both Eileen in reality and Dawn in fiction are caught in the web of structural oppression and resort to violence, horrid violence that is hard to bear witness to, as a means of finding agency and voice to fight the capitalist patriarchy that forces them into the role of subaltern. Perhaps the most famous films I would like us to consider tonight is the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. I find everything about this series fascinating, especially its popularity. If you didn't know this, Stieg Larsson's original title for these books was Men Who Hate Women, and it has been completely lost on American audiences. Just tell somebody that and they won't believe you. Again, we have in these films an assaulted woman, if you know the story, who uses violence to enact revenge on those who have wronged her and her family. And we're gonna watch the trailer that introduces you to all the characters in case you don't know them. Again, if you've seen this movie, you know there's some really graphic violence in it. You're not gonna see any of it in this. We're forced to watch this 10-second ad.
She's one of the best investigators I have, but she's different. In what way? In every way.
Something wrong with the report?
Anything you chose not to disclose?
He's clean, in my opinion. He's honest.
Our credibility isn't dead yet.
Mine is.
He's had a long-standing sexual relationship with his co-editor of the magazine. Sometimes he pleasures her. Not often enough, in my opinion.
No, you're right not to include that. I need your help. You come and stay on the island. A way of avoiding all those people you might want to avoid right now. You will be investigating thieves, misers, bullies, the most detestable collection of people that you will ever meet. My family. This is Harriet. Someone in the family murdered Harriet. And for the past 40 years has been trying to drive me insane. Those are from her, and the rest from her killer. You failed to adapt to 4 foster homes. Arrested twice for intoxication, twice for assault. How many partners have you had in the last month? And how many of those were men?
She has control of my money.
And you will, once you learn to be sociable. Why not we start with me? You know what to do.
I can't find something you've been unable to find in 40 years.
You don't know that. You have a very keen, investigative mind.
You were here that day.
A terrible day. Searching, not finding. I never found the body. Was it spontaneous? Was it calculated? Did she know something someone wish she didn't?
The last time I reported on something without being absolutely sure, I lost my life saving. I need a research assistant.
I know an excellent one. She did the background check on you. The what? You don't think we could hire just anyone for something like this?
It's Mikael Blomqvist. May I come in? We need to talk.
Hey, who do you think you are?
Put some clothes on. Get rid of your girlfriend. Can I call you Elizabeth? I want you to help me catch a killer of women. I've got absolutely no idea how they're connected to the death of a 16-year-old girl. Don't you need to look over these?
I got it.
It's better to look at what I'm about to show you rather than discover. We did it.
Leaving us?
Encrypted.
Please.
Rape, torture, fire, animals, religion. Am I missing anything?
The names. I may have something.
Nobody likes people poking around in that line.
Everybody knows why you're here. Someone killed her. Someone on the island that day.
If a woman approaches any beast and lies with it, we shall kill the woman and
If you haven't seen this film, it is deeply rooted in misogyny and violence. Okay, another talk, another time. But I want to talk about the title. So Lisbeth, that you just met, if you've never met her before, Lisbeth Salander, is certainly not a girl. She is a woman in this film. Infantilizing her and naming the film The Girl, and then pointing out something on her body is similar to naming Dawn's film Teeth. The body becomes the girl. Because a true girl would never ever do the things these women do, even if their bodies were violated. And in all of the advertising for the film, why is Lisbeth always behind Bloomquist when the trilogy is supposedly her story? And don't forget she's a girl still when she kicks the hornet's nest 2 books later. Making Lisbeth Salander a girl denies her her womanhood, because we don't want to see her as a woman. And there is very little in this book about a tattoo. My students always remark upon the fact that the tattoo gets a page of description out of the 100 pages of text, and in the film it is often put into the viewer's gaze as a mean of titillating the viewer. So this next is pretty graphic. This is where she enacts revenge on the person that has been withholding her money, forcing her into sexual acts, and then rapes her earlier. So a natural woman, so she carves into the stomach, I'm a sadistic pig and a rapist of this man. A natural woman would never do what she does in the trilogy, which includes enacting a horrifying scene of revenge on the man who rapes her earlier in the text. So as an analog to this film and in the infantilization and fetishization in the title, I want us to consider another film with girl in the title. That's a nicer one to end with. So even if it is about a woman, Gone Girl. So how many of you have seen Gone Girl? My gosh, y'all need to see some movies. In it, well, you're gonna wanna see it after this. In it, Amy Dunn exploits the damsel in distress trope, lulls the world into the comforting myth of women as naturally weak and prone to victimhood, and subverts the myth as a means for revenge on men for their ridiculous expectations of what women should be. So I'm going to show you probably the most famous clip from this movie. It's her speech about what it means to be a cool girl. She has faked her own kidnapping and has created this ruse that makes everybody think her husband has been abusing her. She really takes all those things, those ideas of victimhood, and exploits them. So this is when she has fled, and this will be the last clip that we watch.
Then Nick will die too. Nick and Amy will be gone, but then we never really existed. Nick loved a girl I was pretending to be. Cool girl. Men always use that, don't they, as their defining compliment. She's a cool girl. Cool girl is hot. Cool girl is gay. Cool girl is fun. Cool girl never gets angry at her man. She only smiles in a chagrin-loving manner, and then presents her mouth for fucking. She likes what he likes, so evidently, he's a vinyl hipster who loves fetish manga. If he likes girls gone wild, she's a mall babe who talks football and endures buffalo wings at Hooters. When I met Nick Dunn, I knew he wanted a cool girl. And for him, I'll admit, I was willing to try. I wax stripped my pussy raw. I drank canned beer watching Adam Sandler movies. I ate cold pizza and remained a size 2. I blew him, semi-regularly. I lived in the moment. I was fucking game. I can't say I didn't enjoy some of it. Nick teased out in me things I didn't know existed. A lightness, a humor, an ease. But I made him smarter, sharper. I inspired him to rise to my level. I forged the man of my dreams. We were happy pretending to be other people. We were the happiest couple we knew. And what's the point of being together if you're not the happiest? But Nick got lazy. He became someone I did not agree to marry. He actually expected me to love him unconditionally. Then he dragged me, penniless, to the navel of this great country and found himself a newer, younger, bouncier, cool girl. You think I'd let him destroy me and end up happier than ever? No fucking way. He doesn't get to win.
So we shouldn't forget that all of these characters, except Amy, who is in some way exploiting this, are being failed by the patriarchal system and do not fall under the parameters of woman under biological essentialism. Eileen wants to get out of prostituting and is mocked for her attempt. Dawn is being told that a virgin is all that matters and she is now dirty. Lisbeth is raped by the people in the system who are supposed to be protecting her welfare. Because all three revolt against the system of oppression, we have to other them and distance themselves from a singular femininity that is attached to biological essentialism. Remember, women are peace-loving and creators of life, and only unnatural women would enact violence. Relying on this comforting myth of biological essentialism is the only way society can sleep at night, but it also denies women the full range of human existence and resistance against oppression. Denied their womanness, their femininity, because they don't fit into the biological essentialist and the difference feminists' idea of what is natural for a woman, a superior affinity for peace and giving of life instead of a violent taker of life. So I want to circle back to Pollitt's critique of difference feminism to end this talk. She writes at the end of her essay, "No one asks that other oppressed groups win their freedom by claiming to be extra good. And no other oppressed group thinks it must make such a claim in order to be accommodated fully and across the board by society. Only for women is simple justice an insufficient argument. It is as though women don't really believe they are entitled to full citizenship unless they can make a special claim to virtue. Why isn't being human enough?" And I will leave you with the same question. So thank you, and I would like to answer any questions or talk with you about the films that you saw.